Where are you in the storm? In the chaos, can you hear our desperate call?
Hello and welcome to day 3 in our series Navigating the Storm, drawn from the story of the Apostle Paul's tumultuous journey to Rome and taken from the 27th chapter of the book of Acts. As we join the action today, Paul has been put on a ship with other prisoners headed for Italy, but the journey up to this point has been a difficult one. However, despite the struggle, the ship managed to get into harbour in a port called Fair Havens, and we will join the story from there. Acts 27, verses 8 to 12. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to Paul, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbour was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbour in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. So although we are presenting a short passage that we will look at today and tomorrow, I think there is a big theme presented in it, relevant to navigating life's storms. And it relates to what we might call listening to the leading of God, what we might call listening to our gut, and as we will look at tomorrow, listening to the advice of others. So how are you at making decisions? What are some of the factors you consider when a decision must be made? In the passage that I have just read, there is a decision to be made about whether the ship that Paul and his fellow prisoners are on should continue to harbour in Fair Havens or sail on to Crete. Life presents us with a lot of decisions about what to do, and all the time. Occasionally, some of these have a big impact on our lives or the lives of those that travel with us. And our decisions are not always a simple case of right and wrong. There was nothing morally right or wrong about staying in Fair Haven. There was nothing morally right or wrong about heading over to Crete. Nevertheless, a decision had to be made. And it would appear that in this case, it was the Roman centurion Julius who ultimately had the responsibility to make that call. And so understandably and wisely, he seeks the advice of both the captain of the ship and the ship's owner. They advised Julius to continue the journey to Crete. But Paul clearly felt very strongly that this would be calamitous. We are not told why he felt this way, and the passage itself does not explicitly tell us. But perhaps we could safely assume that either Paul was in some way led by God, or he had a kind of not quite explainable and perhaps divinely inspired gut instinct about it. I wonder how many of you have had experiences where you would say that you were led by the Spirit? I wonder how many of you have had experiences where you would say you had a strong gut instinct about something. Perhaps you could not put your finger on exactly what it was, but perhaps there have been times when you had a sense that a particular course of action needed to be taken or avoided. Now, I do not think, and I am not saying, that these senses are always God-given or accurate. Just because you feel something doesn't mean that you are right. But nevertheless, I do think that sometimes these senses of what we should or should not do are worth paying attention to. I believe that they can sometimes act as a kind of compass when navigating the decisions of life, and that they may need to be expressed and acted on. In an account a little earlier in the book of Acts, Luke writes the following account about one of Paul's previous journeys. He says, Paul and his companions travelled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. What might have it meant that the Holy Spirit kept them from going to this place? Or that the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to enter into that place? Is Luke writing about some adverse circumstances that were preventing them? Is Luke talking about Paul hearing an audible voice? Is Luke talking about something that would feel more to Paul like a sense of the Spirit's leading, or a kind of divinely fed gut instinct? Well, we just don't know. But as we desire to navigate our own waters, set our course through life, and sometimes journey through our storms, here are a couple of questions to think about. To what extent should we listen to our gut instinct? And to what extent do you think that a sense of the leading of God's Spirit, or what is sometimes called God's still, small voice, can be heard by you and therefore potentially acted on? More on this section of the story tomorrow.